So this week on the podcast, I'm back with Tom in the UK, which is nice. And we're going to discuss what happened last week in Dubai in the World Padel Championships, which teams impressed, which teams we thought could have done better, and talk a little bit about the structure of the World Padel Tour and what it's like in the Middle East. And then, as always, we'll finish with some of our community questions.
So you're back into English weather, grey,
pouring down.
You spent the last week in Dubai, hot, humid conditions, out of the World Champs. How did it go? How did you find it?
It was good, really. I love those events because it's an opportunity to compete at a really high level for a whole week. Like every single day, you've got good matches, and you're surrounded by international teams that have all been training throughout the year. They've all it's competition. It's that feeling of competition which I really, really enjoy. Yes, it was humid and hot conditions, which took a few days to get used to. We arrived a couple of days early, and really, in hindsight, probably I could have done with an extra day or two there. The humidity was up there, I think, kind of 80% on that first day, and it was about 30 degrees, which is obviously way warmer than we're used to. And actually, really interestingly, the first couple of days we practiced during the day and it was kind of dry, and then both of our first two matches were 7 p.m. onwards. So my match went on at 10 p.m. Well, the humidity is completely, and the temperature completely different at that time, and the glass was starting to get wet and the balls were heavy, and I mean it was quite interesting how much the conditions changed in the space of an hour or two.
Do you find that the countries dealt with humidity were the ones that they're used to playing in that? Like you say, it's the GB team have come over from the grey and the drizzle, and they've come over to those sort of conditions. I imagine there's probably a lot of other countries, probably the Northern Hemisphere, struggling a little bit. Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I had this conversation with the Egyptian guys because the Egyptian team obviously come from Egypt, and the previous week they did a Premier Padel in Egypt. So all the the Spaniards and the Argentinian team all came from that, and the conditions are quite similar, and likewise in South America in certain areas it was what they were used to. But for our European teams who are used to playing either indoors or in cold and different conditions, it was a big change. Definitely the off-court hydration and preparation for the match was kind of key. A lot of people cramping, particularly on those first day or two.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching obviously a lot of the matches and all of your matches, and it just looked like tough conditions out there.
It definitely was, and and you probably noticed from the matches that the high lob became a factor, the fast serve into the glass. I mean, normally a fast serve into the glass at that level, if the courts were dry, would be no problem at all. It would just be returned, but the balls were slightly heavier, the glass was a little bit wet, and so it would skid through. And also, the surface that we were using was this Italian green. It wasn't the Mondo from World Padel Tour, and so it was actually really skiddy and quite fast. So if you served a fast serve into the glass and you volleyed fast on that next ball, it was really, really difficult for the defenders to slow that game down. Yeah.
No, I mean, when you look at the different players there, it looked like there was, some players would really like those conditions and others probably weren't. Perhaps their game isn't as suited to that. How did you find it when
I think also it's experience. Like I was there the whole week thinking, wow, these are really tough conditions. The ball is flying through, and I was struggling, to get that speed to change the speed. But then I watched, the final with Argentina, Spain, and they made it look quite easy. I mean, their rallies were so long. They were used to dealing with those type of conditions or the balls that they were receiving, and using the lob so effectively and the Chiquita so effectively that the other teams, particularly like Great Britain, and there's a lot of them that are from tennis backgrounds that are used to playing quite fast, we found it really difficult to slow that ball down.
Conditions are an interesting one, aren't they? Because I remember from my tennis days that it can take about a few days of competing to actually get used to those conditions, and I think you almost have to go kind of easy on yourself those first few days. You probably by the end of the trip you're like, oh, I'm quite enjoying these courts now, but the start, those first few matches, and it was a tough group, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, we had a really tough group, but I mean, for me it took me probably 3 days to acclimatise to temperature, humidity, and then there was an extra probably 3 days of acclimatizing to the level. Like
Yeah.
I've just not played that level, consistently day in, day out. It's different from the guys that are playing the World Padel Tour and, or the FIPS or the APT or whatever tournaments they're playing, where they're playing each week that level. After those kind of 6 days, I was used to the level and I was used to conditions and I was ready to play. And then I had one more day left. So it was a little bit late, but I mean that, it takes time to adapt, to the conditions, to the type of court, to the level that we're playing at. But yeah, I mean, it's what we go for, it is that type of competition.
Yeah. And so any countries that surprised you from the competition? I mean, we know that, for the men's side, the Argentinian team won, and then from the women's side, the Spanish team won. But any countries that you thought surprised you in a good way this year?
Yeah, I think there were some, really, I say nice surprises. I mean, some good surprises. Obviously, Portugal hadn't played the last few years because of their disruption or discussions with the FIP. So they played this year and put out a fantastic team, both men's and women's, and beat Brazil, which was a real shock, and ended up, I think they finished fourth, just behind France. Another team that did really, really well was Belgium, and I wasn't expecting Belgium to do so well. They beat Italy, the men's team, and I think Belgium ladies, they may have finished fourth. I've actually got the results here, so I'm not going to be guessing at the rankings. But
that's big, right? Belgium to beat Italy. Italy's probably one of the up and coming. Emerging.
I mean, the women's was Spain, Argentina, Italy, Belgium. So Belgium beat Portugal, beat Sweden, beat France. And these are all, really strong nations that they finished ahead of. And you don't really hear a lot about Belgium paddle. That was fantastic in the women's side. And then in the men's, they finished sixth, which, behind Argentina, Spain, France, Portugal, which did really well. Brazil was a little further down because of their loss to Portugal, and then Belgium, and Italy finished ninth, which was a little bit of a surprise. So those were the surprises at the top end, and as far as other surprises, I was really impressed with from the ladies' side, the Japan team. They fought so hard. You've got to think that in Japan, they don't have the influence of a lot of Spanish or Argentinian coaches or players, or, they can't enter that high level of competition. So for them to come across and compete really hard, and they fought, I watched quite a few of their matches and they did really, really well. And the other one was Egypt. This was their first World Padel Championships. And I mean, the team really, I remember them about a year and a half ago, they entered an Arab Padel Cup and they lost, I think it was to Qatar, and even lost to UAE. And I mean, and this time it was a completely different team, great athleticism, great, fight and competing from those guys. And, they will definitely be one to watch in the future.
What was it like, the atmosphere there? It must have been amazing to have all these countries come together. I suppose like a World Cup or an Olympics, all these countries together in one place. What was the atmosphere like? I mean, we obviously see the results, we see you playing, but what was it like behind the scenes?
I mean, it was fantastic, really, because I mean, Dubai has a big expat population anyway, and so all of their teams. We had British people that lived in Dubai, and it was the same with the Portuguese, the Argentina. They had their little expat groups that would follow the team, which was fantastic. But I mean, there's over 200 players in this event, and it was so good to have them all in the hotel, on the courts. Just it was a really good atmosphere of paddle. And one of the things that impressed me the most was the representation from the GCC countries. I mean, while I was there, it was great opportunity to meet some of our community, from Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi, Qatar, UAE. Like those groups, and Egypt, those groups really represented the highest proportion of the people watching. I mean, the final, it sold out a 5,000 seater stadium, which, if I look back, when I was organising the World Padel Tour Masters in 2015, we really, really struggled to fill the stands that we had at NAS, and that was, around 400 or 500 seats. Whereas here, I mean, that stadium just absolutely filled up for the final, and it was, the majority were people from the GCC. So I was so happy, it was so glad and happy to see that.
What can we learn from, they've managed to sell out that stadium, and a lot of emerging countries, now kind of putting on events and exhibitions and, you know, trying to fill stadiums or fill up, you know, exhibition matches. Is there anything we can learn from how they've done it? Is it just people in that area just so passionate about the sport that they filled it, or do you think that the organisers did something like a little bit different to bring people in? Or
I mean, at first I would say the organisers did a fantastic job. I mean, they had 42 days from when, you know, it was agreed to when they were hosting, which is no time at all. And like in Dubai, they always do really, really good events. That, you know, they're always used to doing 5-star events. So it was a, you know, really, really well organised event. But I would say that it's also to do with timing, you know, because now there are about 500 courts and Padel is, you know, on an upward curve in that area. But a few years ago, they would not have been able to sell it out. And this is something that countries like the UK, they've got 200 courts. If they were to do a World Padel Tour now, you know, yes, maybe you'd get some Europeans across for it and you could, but you wouldn't, I don't think you would fill a stadium like that right now. And so it's almost like doing it at the right stage or right phase that you're at. And if you've looked recently, you know, there was a World Padel Tour, you know, and big events in Belgium and in Amsterdam, and those were, you know, packed events, and they looked amazing because they're at that stage in development. So I would probably, you know, my advice would be there's no need to rush an international competition, but then once you do, you know, get all the clubs involved, get the communities involved, and that's exactly how they did it, really.
So you talked about the organisation of the event. It was really, really good. Was there anything else from a sort of event that you were positively surprised about, or anything?
I was really positively surprised with the UAE side, particularly. You know, obviously I worked with the UAE Federation for 8 years, and this was almost my role, was organising, you know, these type of events, and they did a great job in a short space of time. And working with the FIP is not easy. You know, there are many things that could be improved from the FIP side of things. You know, it's things like, you know, we would get our schedule for the day at 1 a.m. of that day. So, you know, we would have a tentative schedule that would say, right, you're playing at 9 o'clock. So we're all setting our alarms for 7:45. Let's get down to breakfast. And then the time has changed at 1 a.m. for 11 or 12. And you've already set your alarm, you're already up, and you find out when you check it at breakfast. And it's things like that, you know, and waiting till the last minute for the schedule. Everyone, you know, is messaging either through the community or people that want to know, they want to, you know, watch live streams, they want to organise their days, and it just all feels last minute, when really it shouldn't be like that. I mean, you know, it's like the World Cup or any other big sporting event. You would know this. You should know the schedule in advance so you could plan around it. And instead of trying to make adjustments for, you know, teams that you want to help or however it may be. So I think there's still a little way to go for the FIP when it comes to organisation. But really, I mean, UAE, hats off to them. They did a great job.
I think it's going to take a bit of time, isn't it, with Padel as it grows and more countries start playing it. I think it's almost this maturity, isn't it, to the level of professionalism of other sports, isn't it?
Yeah, and you know, until 6-7 years ago, it was just Spain and Argentina that played, really. You know, and now we're having influences of, you know, the Nordics and European and the UK and, you know, Australia now, and now that Padel is with Tennis Australia, and wait till US comes on, and then it's like, right, suddenly, you know, we need a bigger organisation, a more professional organisation to take this to the next level. And I think it's a normal stepping stone that now needs to happen, because we're getting more and more teams that are coming into this event. And, you know, this time there was a bit of a difficulty because the host nation changed, and it was Qatar, which normally the host nation gets a wild card. So that meant that Qatar didn't play the qualifying because they were meant to. But obviously it was held in UAE, so UAE got the wild card, and then they put Qatar in, which left us with 17 teams. So the schedule had to adapt, and I completely understand that, and I feel like, you know, it would have been unfair to not include Qatar or UAE, but it's, you know, it's kind of these organisations and things like that, it shouldn't be last minute. I mean, you know, we should be coming to the start of next year, and we know, you know, all of these big events and tournaments for the rest of the year. But I mean, we didn't even find out about the UK qualifying event till 4 weeks before. And you've got to think that, you're moving teams. Teams are having to book flights and accommodation and organise themselves. And, if it's left to the last minute like it currently is, then teams will struggle to do that.
Well, it's a kind of process of globalisation, is it? Like, as more teams start playing, they just simply won't be able to operate that way, right? I mean, in the past, it might have been probably possible if you've just got, like you say, Spain and Argentina. It's probably easier with a couple of teams, and suddenly if you've got tens of teams having to travel, it's just not going to be possible, is it?
And you've got to think that, it's not easy to host one of these events. Doha in Qatar did a fantastic job on the previous one, and Dubai, UAE have done a great job here. But there's not a lot of countries that have the infrastructure and the financial backing to host such an event. I mean, that is an expensive tournament for them to be running. So, you've got to think that this structure has to become, like you say, more globalized so that, countries are confident in the professionalism of it and therefore want to host it.
Yeah. I mean, from a Team GB perspective, you guys gone away, you played some good matches, had a tough group. What was the kind of sort of summary from the team? What was the feeling afterwards? Was it, everyone was quite upbeat? Was it quite a tough week, but I thought some good matches in there as well. What was the team spirit kind of?
Yeah,
afterwards?
I mean, the team spirit was good throughout, I think. We finished 14th, and I think that's probably a representation of where we are. Yes, there are probably one or two teams ahead of us that we could have potentially beaten, but then also Sweden lost in the qualifying that is a stronger team than us. So, I don't think we can't feel that, it was unjustified. Like, our group, was really strong. Spain, Portugal, Uruguay, but we definitely had our chances against Uruguay, and that could have, changed matters. But it wasn't, it was upbeat, and the way we have to look at it is that, as a kind of national team, we need to now put some structures in place to develop that team and to do some training. And one of the biggest struggles that I've had, and we've talked about it on previous podcasts, is being able to train in this country and train at a good level. And right now it's really difficult to do that. So we have to accept that it's going to take a bit of time for paddle to catch up in this country, but we need to say, right, what can we do in this medium to short term that can kind of give our team a chance to compete against these other nations.
Yeah, you can see it as well, can't you? These other nations, the ones that are kind of emerging, they're adding that element of professionalism, aren't they? That at the moment in the UK we just don't have the infrastructure for, I think, in place. So I mean, a lot of the UK guys are probably going to go to Spain, I imagine, to train. Is that the plan?
I mean, that's the only option, really. And a lot of these countries, like Portugal, Belgium, Sweden, etc. They're all doing national trials to see who can get in the team. Well, we've essentially had the same group of 8 players for the last eight years, really. So it's, even if we improve the level of those 8, it's like we don't have a structure now that is feeding players through. And that's not fixed overnight. That's something that, yes, these players could go to Spain and it will improve their level, but it's not going to help the system of producing players, which is what the LTA and the Federation and we at the Paddle School want to be a part of as well. So, but it will take time.
Yeah. We did last time we were here. We did the overrated, underrated.
I enjoyed that.
I enjoyed it as well.
Yeah.
Last time I think we focused on the sort of recreational side of paddle, but I think it might be interesting. You've just come away from the World Champs. So why don't we apply that to what you saw out there from the really top guys? So I'll throw it to you because I wasn't there. But so overrated. What do you think was overrated when we're talking this really, really high level?
Overrated.
Have I given you the hard one to start with?
Let's do underrated.
Underrated first, okay. Underrated.
Underrated is, and we talk about this all the time, is patience and consistency and not going for too much. Constantly. And this is partly from a tennis background as well, but, players are going for small margins, low over the net, angle winners, finishing smashes. And actually, as the week went on, we realised that, look, if you just make one more ball, then it gives your opponent the chance to miss. And sometimes, yes, you might hit that ball a little bit too high and it might float up, but there's, a possibility they could miss that. And I think, this idea of just getting one more ball in play and, not worrying too much about, the most amazing of angles. Now, if you're playing against Spain and Argentina, then yes, you do need to worry about those margins. But for the vast majority of recreational players or even, quite advanced players is, make another ball. Like you don't need to have your eye on finishing immediately.
Do you think that's more of a mental? I feel like that's more of a mental rather than a tactical thing. Do you think it's
definitely?
Yeah,
definitely. And it can come from a lot of things. It could come from a lack of confidence at the back of the court. So you want to rush forward and you need to hit an extra good chiquita to sprint forward, or it might be a kind of not a fear, but too much respect for your opponents, and you're thinking, right, I have to play, a great ball down here. And, that I really felt this against Portugal, for example. When we played Portugal, I felt like I was constantly trying to go for small margins because I thought they were, I gave them too much respect. And there was a phase in that match where I just played a little bit higher and I just played a little bit more central. And actually what happened was we got into more rallies and they therefore made more mistakes. And you've got to be able to allow your opponent to make mistakes. So if you're trying to finish that point too quickly or, being too aggressive, you can't let that happen. So, that's what I recommend. And that's right the way down to beginner level, make it your objective and try it in a set or a match. Just think, right, this set, I'm going to make one more ball than my opponent. I don't really, I'm not going to focus on finishing. I just want to make one more ball and just see what happens.
It's consistency, isn't it? When I was watching matches as well, it's the best teams are keeping their level at a certain level, and obviously the better teams and the best teams in the world, they have a very high sort of base level, and they're able to kind of increase on that level, but they never really drop below it. And I think it's interesting, the teams that perhaps are sort of emerging and sort of getting up there are. It's a little bit sort of up and down. Might play two or three good points, then a couple of not so good points, and it's a bit more of a kind of roller coaster. Whereas those top teams are just keep that. They've got a base level. They just don't.
That is definitely the gap between Spain, for example. A Spain and a Portugal is they just make less mistakes. Portugal play fantastic. They really fight and they do some really good paddle points. But they might make one or two unforced errors a game, and the Spain don't do that, and that is the difference, really, and that's why the final, lasted so long. So, and when it comes to overrated, I've thought of that one now while we were talking, but it almost is along the same lines in the smash. The smash for me is, as a finishing shot, overrated, and I say that. In a couple of meanings, in that, the Spanish teams, if you hit a lob up, almost anywhere on the court, Paquito or LeBron, they are able to finish the point. So that aside, even from Portugal, let's say Portugal as a guideline down, going for an aggressive smash too early in the point or not quite the right ball inevitably led to the opponents winning. And I saw this time and time again with nations, men's and women's, was going for an aggressive smash when it just wasn't the right opportunity, and they end up going from an advantageous position in the point to being on the defence. So it was almost better when you had an opportunity to be aggressive to just play one more ball safe rather than thinking that you're going to finish.
Do you think though that's because those countries that are playing up to the better teams, they're not used to how well their opponents are defending? Because it sounds like to me like you play sort of lower level players, you smash and you win the point because they're not defending, but those top guys their defense is so strong that perhaps you're not used to it.
And I think also it's conditions, right?
Yeah.
Like it was humid, the balls were heavy, so the smash, and also the type of grass was more slidey than bouncy, and the ball just wasn't going up, and so everyone worked that out on the first day or the second day. You would play, and then you'd say, right, we know that's not the case, but then doing it is a different thing. It's if you know that, then don't go for those smashes. you know, and it's quite difficult to stop that instinct. And you know, it could be, if you were talking recreational level, it might be the type of balls you're using. Or maybe one day you're using, you know, new ball paddle balls which are very fast, and the next day you're using like the head, you know, the head pro ball, and which is a lot slower, and you're maybe playing on a slower court, and you therefore hit one or two smashes and say, no, that's not working. It's not bouncing as it has before, or as it could do. I'm going to adapt my game. Like that's really important.
Because if you've been training though, that's hard, right? If you've been training, let's say indoors for your, you know, let's say the whole time leading up to this, and you suddenly, there's that decision. I mean, the decisions are made in a split second, aren't they? And it's almost, you have to sort of change that decision.
And you're thinking, like, we're playing Portugal, and I'm thinking they are not missing a ball. Yeah. Like, they are getting every single ball back. You finish a set, and the set has taken, you know, an hour and 20 minutes, when normally your sets at home take, you know, 40 minutes. There's a huge temptation to say, right, I'm just going to finish the point. Yeah. Like, I need to finish this. This works when I'm at home and I'm getting tired. I need to finish this point. And the moment you start doing that is when it starts going wrong, because you're forcing, you know, you're trying to force a finish when it's not there.
I think this leads really well into our question, actually, from the community.
Let's do it.
Talking about conditions. So, yeah, this person said, look, I played the whole summer outdoors, and now we're coming to winter, and now I'm playing indoors. So, do you have any tips for making that transition from outdoor to indoor? Or is there anything to change? I imagine is what they're asking.
Yeah, I think, you know, here we're talking outdoor to indoor, and I saw this question. I can't remember which part of the world they're in, you know, because an outdoor in the summer in Dubai versus an outdoor in summer in the UK is very different. But I think whenever you're changing surface, court, indoor to outdoor, altitude, you know, ball type, rackets, you know, I think it's just being aware of your surroundings. Like, you know, if you have been playing in the summer and you've been playing outdoors, you know immediately that there are conditions involved. You know, you've got to consider the sun and the wind and, you know, the kind of type of surface that you're on. And then when you go indoor, you've got to then consider, right, well, I don't have those, but I do have the height of the roof. You know, I do have, you know, the lights and the speed of the ball might be different. And so it's realising those things. And some of those things you can work out before you even step on court. I mean, you know, the height of the roof and the sunny conditions and the wind, you can tell before you even step on court. I think the thing is, and this comes again back to almost self-analysis, is if we're playing together and we're going to a tournament and we really want to win this tournament, if we meet up 2 minutes before we have to go on court and I'm like, you know, and we spend that 2 minutes discussing what you had for dinner, instead of, which you're smiling there.
Only 2 minutes, yeah.
Just a quick 2 minutes on your dinner. But instead of saying, right, okay, these are our conditions, these are our opponents, you know, communicating with how we're going to play, like, those conversations are really important. Because I've had this before where, you know, I've spoken to, you know, our students and they've played the first set and then they'll come off at the change of ends and I'll say to them, right, you know, we're hitting too often to the left-hander. And they're like, oh, one's left-handed. You know, like, and it's not because they you know, they don't see it. It's just because they're not having these conversations. And it's like, you know, if you said, right, you should be saying, okay, which direction is the wind blowing? You know, where is the sun? And in our team, we were doing this in Dubai. You know, one of our players is left-handed, so it's like, right, the sun is up in that position, so if you're lobbed at this side, as a lefty, the sun's in your eyes, so, you know, the right-hander will take that. And it's these conversations that you need to have. And I think if you can say, right, I moved indoors, here is this, and this that's different, and how am I going to play? Probably the player knows the answer.
Yeah.
It's just having that conversation.
We've had this before, haven't we, when students are playing matches and almost as something as simple as at the change of ends or the change of a set, saying, how are we going to win the point? How are we winning our points here? That it sounds so simple, but a lot of players don't actually have that thought in their head. They're sort of just going through the motions of sort of playing each point. They're not actually thinking, how are we going to win? Like, based on our strengths, how are we going to target our opponent's weaknesses and win the point.
And I think it's interesting because I think the key bit is saying it. Like I think people think of it, but they don't talk. Like if we're sitting down and this is our change of ends, and I said to you, okay, Tom, how do you think we're going to win the point? Like what do you recommend? You will then articulate what you think is a good tactic. But if we sit down at the change of ends and we don't really say anything, then it's difficult for us to get on the same page. So asking questions is a great way to do that with your partner.
Yeah, because most of the time you actually end up talking about perhaps the past, don't you? You say, I shouldn't have missed that ball. Or
I missed that ball at 30 love and then I hit this. Yeah. And you dwell on that. And always, you've got to try and A, get positive, and B, kind of talk tactically and get your, it's a support, we're a support network, right? So if you're dwelling on a previous point, I need to get you now into the present and into what we're going to do in the next game. So, a question is a really good way to do that.
It's this dynamic, isn't it, between, I think let's jump into that in another podcast, the dynamic between partners is so important, isn't it? But it's you sort of, I don't know, it's a bit of a intangible in a way, isn't it, that relationship you have and
definitely.
How to get the best out of someone else.
Definitely, and we referenced it in the Changing Your Partners for the World Padel Tour. And what we'll do is, in our previous podcast, we'll put that into a playlist, and I'll put that link down in the description for all of those other podcasts, one of which is Changing Partners for the World Padel Tour. But let me know down in the comments if you watched any of this World Padel Championships in Dubai, and if there are any teams you were particularly impressed by.